Hello, everyone. My name is Reese Lindmark, and you're listening to Gray Mirror, a podcast from MIT Media Lab's Digital Currency Initiative on technology, society, and ethics. And unlike something like Black Mirror, which just looks at the negative impacts of technology on society, we are Gray Mirror, so we look at the positive and negative impacts of technology on society. And please, if you have any feedback, reach out on Twitter. And if you like the show, give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app. We really do appreciate it. Thanks. So in today's episode, I interview Kate Darling. She's a research specialist at the MIT Media Lab and an affiliate at the Harvard Berkman Klein Center. And we chat about a variety of things. I just want to highlight 3. We chat a good amount about tech and law and their coevolution, especially some of the balances to be aware of. We also chat about gender and privilege, and I especially like her point about how it's a system and how men can get hurt as well. And then finally, we chat about how for her recently, she recently became a mother, and that has been really helpful to force both a longer-term view for her on the world and to kind of help her empathize with more people in the world. So with that, I hope you enjoy today's episode with Kate. Hello, everybody. You're listening to Gray Mirror. Kate, thanks for being on the show and welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited to chat. And we're here in person in my new office. And so it's a fun in-person interview, which is always good. So we're going to talk about 2 main things here. The first is how tech and law interact in society, and the second is about gender and privilege and intersectionality and power. So let's start on the first piece here. And the first is, I know, Kate, you've done some. Well, I guess before diving deeper into the law piece, could you just tell me how you understand our current kind of macro context and the goals given our macro context?
That's a really big question.
It's big. It's tough.
That's
a
tough. Macro question.
It's tough. Yeah.
Oh, you mean my goals?
I'm talking about how do you see when you think about the world in a macro, the global context, with whether it's Trump things or whether it's capitalism, or how do you kind of see all the different pieces of the world interacting these days, and how do you think we should move forward given the current status quo?
Oh my gosh, if anyone knew the answer to how we should move forward. But I can tell you, from my perspective,
nice.
I feel so my main interest is in how systems shape human behavior, and so I studied law, I did some law and economics, and now I do technology and technology ethics. And I think what I've realized is that Larry Lessig was very prescient. He wrote the book, what is it? Code is Law? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was his big book, where he talked about the 4 factors that can influence society and have a huge effect on society, which are laws, norms, markets, and architecture, I think, are the 4. And I've found that to be true. If you look at, how my interests have evolved over time, they look very different from each other, but actually I'm really interested in, those 4 things and how they can shape human behavior. And so sometimes lawyers look at the world through the eyes of, how can we regulate and change things that way? Technologists look at the world through, code and how can we build things and shape things that way. And so my favorite thing is to look through all these different lenses and figure out, what does that mean? And it's, of course, much more complicated to view the world that way. There's probably even many, many more lenses to view the world through. So I don't really know where, what to focus on right now, because I don't know, things have gotten really dark lately. Not just in the U.S. So it's a little bit, I feel like a lot of us are floundering and trying to figure out what is the best path forward. Is it politics? Is it, building things to help? Is it, I don't know. We're just all trying to figure out what to do. And I don't know what the path is. I think the goal is a better world.
Yep. For who, on what timeline?
And how do we define that? Yeah. I mean, Hitler had a certain definition of what a better world is that I don't agree with. although he was an animal rights activist. Did you know that?
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Like he was a vegetarian, and like the Nazis passed comprehensive animal rights legislation.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, I think so. At a high level, I super agree with your Lessig's dot framework, which is a great way for people to, before you do anything, you say, okay, the way that the world works is by code and norms and law and markets and incentives, and so those four things are interacting in the world, and what is the state of each of those, and how can we use those things to change going forward. And I also agree with you to say that these days things feel intense/dark. What for you, I guess for me, I think they feel both intense/dark and like fragile. And I also think that in some ways things are more abundant than they've ever been, and we have more ability to change the system than we've ever had. And things have got like less people are in poverty now than they were, less kids die before the age of 5 than used to. So how do you kind of balance those two perspectives, or do you mostly see the world in a pessimistic, dark way?
No, you're right. And Steven Pinker, who gets criticized by many, has this theory about how we're always pessimistic, but when you look at where we are, if you look at the history of how humans have evolved, we're better and happier and like safer than we've ever been, which is a kind of a one-sided view, but certainly there is something to that argument. I am just like very focused kind of on my lifetime, and in particular the lifetime of my child. I just had a kid 15 months ago, and so I think I'm maybe a little bit hyper-focused on the now and making things better now and seeing things that I'm not happy with right now, rather than looking at, we eradicated polio. Cool.
Totally.
Great.
How does that affect my 15-month-old? It's like, I think that for a lot of people, I feel like having kids has been a lot of like someone like the climate change groups that I'm part of, a big piece that they're thinking about. Either people who haven't had kids are like, oh man, should I even have kids? From how much carbon is like, if you have more kids, is that good? And do I want to bring kids into this world, which is kind of scary? Or if you've already have kids, like, oh man, is life going to be good for them, or what's that going to be like? And I don't want to get too intense about that, but I think that the kids make people push this question a little bit, I guess. So moving away from the macro kind of framework perspective here, I want to chat about law specifically, and because for me, I am not a lawyer at any sense of the word, but obviously law can constrain how we do things in the world. So how do you kind of think, if you were thinking about it, it's like there are those 4 Lessig buckets, and one of those buckets is law. If you were to break law into sub-buckets, what would those buckets be?
Oh gosh, I don't know what the sub-buckets would be. There are certainly many sub-buckets. I think when I think about the influence that law has on the world, I have such mixed feelings about regulation, because if you look at the internet, if law hadn't been so far behind technology that like we could hardly catch up, then the internet wouldn't exist in the form that it does today. But at the same time, now we have all these problems with like privacy law being like way behind, current technology, and people actually getting harmed as a result. So the law is it's not enough to just create technology and regulate it afterwards, because the whole architecture piece of it sets defaults, and really, sets things in motion in a way that you can't stop or, change with just regulation. But we find that if we regulate too early, amazing technology doesn't come about. So, so a friend of mine, Ryan Kalo, got screamed at, rightfully so, I believe, but he got screamed at an AI ethics conference for saying that we should wait to regulate facial recognition technology. And his reasoning was because he has seen so many times regulation reacting to a specific technology like that, but then passing really bad regulation that's either too narrow or too broad, and once it's passed, you can't like bring up the issue again when then the gait recognition technology comes around, because the legislators are, you know, fatigued from like having to deal with this issue, and then you wind up just needing to deal with this shitty legislation that you had already passed. And well, he got criticized because facial recognition technology does have some specific attributes and is disadvantaging specific communities right now and really harming them, and so there is a reason. And he took back his statement, and he listened, and he changed it. He changed his mind on that, which I thought was really commendable. But his point about needing to be careful about regulation is very, very true. I mean, anyone who's dealt with policymakers half of the laws we have are just based on, you know, either lobbyists or superstition.
Nice. You have your choice of one of those two things. I don't know. Yeah, I think you're correct in saying that one of the huge tensions here, and honestly, one of the huge tensions is, should you, like, as you say, the early internet folks were so excited that they were able, and you chat about this with your recent Media Lab talk with Douglas Rushkoff, where it was like, hey, it's the early internet folks really didn't want the government in there, you know, and then they got permissionless innovation, and that was cool, but then that enabled Google, Amazon, Facebook, all the aggregators and platforms in that side of things. So it's kind of like having this balance of not too wide, not too narrow, not too soon, not too late, very difficult. Do you think also another piece here, which I think is interesting, is someone like Lawrence Lessig, was working on the intellectual property laws and trying to, push things like the Creative Commons and whatever against the evil lobbyists of, the big, record labels, which, and so I think that, and then over time, he was like, I think I just need to work more on corruption, and I need to work more on kind of how money changes politics. Do you think, how do you think about working directly on like legal issues versus kind of abstracting one level and working on like how money affects politics and law more generally?
Well, I think like the progression from working on copyright legislation to working on money and government makes so much sense, because, he worked on copyright issues for, 10 years, 20 years? How long did he?
A long time.
And he started a whole movement. He had believers. I was one of his biggest fans. Yeah. Still am. He's great. Yeah. And, started Creative Commons, started all these like really, really powerful tools. And yet we got nowhere with copyright legislation. Yeah. And so he realized that the only way to really change things is going straight to their roots. I think it's actually what he says, going to the roots of the problem, and the root of the problem was government corruption in this case, and probably in a lot of other cases too. So I think, I love him because he's bold enough to, see the problem and like go for it, whereas other academics are like, whoa, I need to stay in my lane and do my thing and like work in my my name in this field. And, he's bold enough to do things like run for president and like get ridiculed by everyone, but in order to make a point. So I don't know, we need people working on all fronts though. That's the thing. And I think what would be helpful for better regulation is to have people from different disciplines working together, which is something that we're still very bad at. Like, the world has started talking about how important interdisciplinarity is, but I can tell you from the world of academia, everyone is like, yeah, we need more interdisciplinarity, but there are no structures in place that really support that, or very few. The Media Lab is a great place that does support it. There are some other institutions, but for the most part, to have a good career in academia, you can't be too interdisciplinary. And I think that is hugely harmful to things like, passing good legislation in a world where we have now AI and robotics seeping into all these different areas of people's lives, and the regulators know nothing about the technology. The technologists know nothing about, human behavior or ethics, and everyone sees that there's a problem, but we haven't found a solution yet. Yep.
You're definitely preaching to the choir, both to my listeners and to another Media Lab-ite. Like, oh yes, more interdisciplinary stuff. I also think going to the root of the problem is like, you could either think of it, as going to the root, or like I often say it's like going to the paradigm level from like a Donella Mello systems perspective, where it's like if you change the paradigm, then that can change how laws get implemented. It can change how incentives get structured or whatever. So that's the other hope. But it's so much more difficult to change those things that are even more abstract and more kind of ingrained within us. So in any case, so let's kind of transition over to chatting about like gender and privilege and those kinds of things in tech. I think that so we were chatting after a recent this Douglas Rushkoff event where you had this talk with him about his recent book, and we were just chatting about like essentially similar things to what we're chatting about today, which is what should we do in the world. And I think that one thing that is just always difficult for me to remind myself of as a rich, white, straight American male is how one's identity affects those kinds of decisions. So could you tell me a little bit more about how, when you think about like doing good things in the world, how your own identity affects the decisions that you make?
Yeah, so I didn't think much about this before the election, but after the election happened, I had kind of a crisis, a personal crisis. I was like, what am I doing with my life? I originally went to law school because I wanted to make a difference in the world, and am I doing that now? I work on, human-robot interaction because I'm really passionate about it, so I have like a really fun life and I love it, but is that really important given the political climate and all of these fires that I see everywhere that, I want to be helpful in putting out, but I don't know how. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's a law professor, and I told her, hey, I'm thinking of leaving academia and like going to work for a nonprofit or doing something because I have to do something. And she was like, but you are doing something. And the problem is that women always do this. They leave the tech field, they leave academia, they leave industry, and they go and work for a nonprofit where they earn nothing, where they're, volunteers. And we need people doing that, of course, but we also need women to stay where they are and to represent and to try to change from within. And I know that the whole change from within thing is a little bit problematic, and a lot of people tell themselves that they're changing from within, and I'm still trying to figure out whether I'm doing the right thing by staying on my current career path. And I've been trying to figure out how to, work on some of the issues that I see in different ways from the position that I'm in, and I'm still trying to figure that out. But I ultimately decided, okay, maybe she has a point that I can do more from the stronger position that I'm in right now than I could if I just left and started with something else.
Yeah, so I'm hearing kind of two different things there. One is the ability, a classic question is, should one change by like either influencing the influencers or like working inside the given system, or should they work by like trying to exit that system and trying to to leave it and to influence and to work with to not work with like the influencers or whatever. That's one side, and then the other piece is just like how your identity plays into that. I guess, but you didn't talk too much about that. Do you see like yourself as like, oh, I need to be a role model for women in tech? Is that like a way that you like identify? Or
it's a new, so I think I've had trouble coming to terms with the fact that I actually am like somewhat visible now, because I still feel like an insignificant person and have imposter syndrome like everyone else in Cambridge. But I'm starting to see that, no matter where you are, actually, there always people that you can elevate or try to be a role model for, or try to help in some way. And I was just at an event which was 4 days of speakers, and I was the only woman. And
what?
Yeah, I know.
That's crazy. Sometimes you'll be like, oh, okay, this panel, it's got 5 dudes on it. Like, what's going on here? But like a 4-day event with...
Yeah, that's...
Sounds like a cryptocurrency.
I don't know if they changed it last minute because I wasn't there for the 4 days, but when I saw the lineup, I was the only woman.
Yeah, oof.
And so I have started being more conscious of the fact that I can represent, and maybe that does make somewhat of a difference. I also am trying to, wear whatever I want on stage, and just, to be an imperfect person who is passionate and not afraid to be up there with all the dudes. I don't know, I know it would have helped me. Like when I was a kid, I was really into science fiction and I really liked programming, and it never occurred to me to go into STEM. It just never occurred to me because I didn't have any role models.
Yeah, I think that there are, this stuff is, when I watch, so we are all socialized into our various contexts, and I, as a dude, was socialized into my context, and it was, I mean, when I was in high school, I would use, like, gay as a derogatory term, I'd like, oh, that gay, and I remember being like, oh, God, like in college, I finally got woke to that, and I was like, oh, Jesus, and another version of that a good way that I found to like remind myself of how I was socialized is actually by watching some old movies. So I was watching the one with Robin Williams and Matt Damon and people. It's a nice movie in Boston.
Oh, Good Will Hunting?
Good Will Hunting, which in theory is a beautiful movie, and it's about therapy, and we all love therapy. And but I was watching it, and like the woman character in it was just, like she was essentially just like a random sexualized person in the corner, and it was like what women see when they watch that movie versus what I see, which is like, you can do anything, and you're going to go to MIT, and you're going to do all. It's like totally different, and I was just disgusted essentially. And so I think for me personally, that's been a good reminder, watching the old movies as a way to think about the ways that different people were socialized in childhood. Do you think so? Something that you're chatting about is how you can be a good role model in various ways. And something that I think about is, how can I be, I don't want to call it like an anti-role model, but like how should a dude like me, or a rich person like me, or a white dude like me, or whatever, actively push for more space for non-people like me, like decentralize power away from myself.
Yeah. That applies to all of us. Like, I think that, I, as a, privileged white woman of means, can also be thinking about, how can I cede power or listen to, women of color, or, people who I have been socialized to, treat a certain way or think about in a certain way. So I think we're all constantly on that learning journey. But, I think one of the important things is to understand that the gender roles that we've grown up kind of internalizing are a disservice to men as well. It's not just about men having all the power and giving some to women. I mean, to some extent that's true, because we tend to value male work, for example, but it also puts men in a bucket and says, look, you're supposed to do these things, and you're supposed to be this way. And having a son now myself, I'm thinking a lot about how can I teach him that other things are cool too, when society is telling him the opposite. And I think we're getting better, but we're not nearly there yet. But yeah, I think it's good for all of us to think about what's my privilege and who's less privileged, and how can I listen to what they need and make space for them, and elevate them in some way. Yeah, I think, and I definitely agree with the listening and the elevation piece and that side, and I super agree with the reminding oneself that it's a disservice. It's a system, in that system, it's like, I mean, my like kind of funny example of this is, I've probably had, it was a couple years ago, before a wedding that I went to. I was with a bunch of my female friends, and we all got pedicures before a wedding, and it was so nice. It was like, pedicures should be for everybody, and I believe that, and I think that they're incredible, and I think that that is a small kind of stupid funny example of this, but there are many ways in which men are not allowed to, or are pushed into various boxes, or not allowed to express their femininity, or their those kinds of things, and so reminding oneself that those are that's a two-way system, and that they're negatives for you is, I think. Well, there was this New York Times piece, I think it was New York Times years ago, about how a lot of jobs are being lost to automation, globalization, and there are a lot of men who are out of work in America. Well, the thing is, there are jobs. There are jobs, for instance, in the healthcare sector, where jobs are skyrocketing. And some of these jobs don't require, a lot of education, and you could retrain people to do them, but they're traditionally seen as women's work. And so they're, first of all, not valued. They don't pay as much. But also the men who don't have jobs don't see themselves doing that type of work because we as a society don't value it. And so it's really like doing everyone a disservice to not value work that is traditionally seen as female. And so now we have not enough jobs in this area and too many jobs in this area, and it's just a nightmare. And
the men who are like, oh, I could get a job, but I don't want that job because it's more of a feminine job or whatever. It's like, that's rough. Do you think, so maybe to kind of conclude, I think this is a question, honestly, that works with both, is a thing that I'm constantly battling with is what I would call like coherent pluralism, which is the idea that, so at the top we were talking about the macro situation, there's all the fires, and we can take multiple different perspectives, and it's like, oh boy, which perspective should we take at any given time? It's hard to like actually have a coherent vision given all the craziness that's going down. And then similarly, I think with identity, this can also be an issue where it's like, okay, I am not privileged on all these aspects, or rather I am privileged on all these aspects. There might be some aspects that I'm not privileged on. How should I create coherence around the kinds of identities that I should up prioritize or whatever? So the macro question is, how do you think about creating coherence given lots of options?
Oh, such a good question. I mean, I'm not, a scholar in this area. I know nothing about this. I'm trying to educate myself more as I go, but I could tell you that just for me personally, I feel like the experience of becoming a mother has actually really helped me because it has changed so much in my life. And I also went through some postpartum depression, which it just made me understand that there are people's life experiences that I don't understand, can't understand, and thus can't be judgy about. Like, I need to listen to people and need to try and be more empathic and not make assumptions about other people's experiences. And that's helped me. So, I started on Instagram, I started following more people who are in the space of criticizing white feminism, for example, and just following a bunch of people who I think I can learn a lot from. But even just, I'm noticing more things myself, like walking around Boston in the winter with a stroller. You realize that people don't shovel in front of their houses the way that they should. And you realize, holy shit, if I were in a wheelchair, I wouldn't be able to live in this city. Like how, and so just trying to, be empathic and just be aware that there are other people out there with different experiences. It helps me,
I think I super agree with that, and I think that there's and as you say, something like being a mother, and then experiencing some of the post-mother depression or whatever you call it, that is something where you're like, wow, this is categorically different than anything I've ever. It's a very clear 0 to 1 kind of thing of like, not mother now, and all those the differences in your life. And then from that you say, wow, everybody else in the world is a totally different person. You want to, you can't, it's very difficult to judge them before you try to just understand them first, and then you can accept them, and then you can kind of work with them at that point or whatever, and to try to see their perspective there. I think I like that perspective of empathy, but I want to push a little bit on it and say, so let's say I'm doing that and now I'm empathizing more with lots and lots of different people. How then do I create, coherence given that I'm trying to be so multi-perspective all the time?
Yeah. And I don't have a good answer to that. If you have an answer,
I don't. Do I have a good answer to that? how does one create coherence? I don't know. I think that my answer might be connected to just connecting in with your... I guess here's my answer. My answer would be feeling happy to commit to things for given periods of time and then later readjusting. So it's like a thing where you say, hey, I'm going to empathize with this set of people, and then given all that, I'm going to try to take some actions in my life. And I know that I didn't get all the perspectives, or I didn't do all my good things, but in 3 months, I'm going to work really hard for 3 months or whatever. And then 3 months later, I will come up out of my rabbit hole and say, okay, where am I at now? And then re-pluralize or re-empathize and then choose. So I think of it as kind of like a through time coherence then pluralism dynamic.
I like that. I think a lot of it is being okay with not being able to be coherent because you're just not I remember being in college and taking all these like animal philosophy classes and being like, vegetarianism and veganism are, the right path, but they're not completely philosophically consistent. So like, how can I can't commit to them because they're not, like, they fray at the edges if you like drill down philosophically. And it took me a while to realize, no, wait, like, you can still try to do something even if you're not doing a perfect job of being morally consistent.
Yeah, totally. And that's like, I like the idea of being a flexitarian or a reducitarian. It's like, generally eat less meat, and then you don't need to be perfect, it's not a perfect thing. So, okay, so with that, thank you for your time today. As a note for our listeners, Kate talks about this stuff, but also is actually very an expert, one of the leading experts in robot ethics, or how human robot interaction. So check her out for those things as well. And I guess, Kate, is there anything? How can people find you on Twitter?
My Twitter handle is Grok, GROK _.
Nice. That's an interesting handle.
Yes, there's a long story behind that underscore, but
we won't go too deep now. So thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you so much.
Sweet. Goodbye.